Hello, hello, hello. Can't scare me like that. Jesus Christ. I know it's alarming that I'm not an actual sentient squid plushie. He's right there. You can't scare me like that, guys. Jesus. Oh my God. Hello, hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me, the Squid Plushie. It is finally that time to watch the Mossbag lore video for the Hollow Knight. If you are not already aware, I have, for the past several months, been undergoing my first ever Hollow Knight playthrough completely blind. Everything in that initial save file is 112% completed. We have done everything except for beating all of the bosses on the Radiant modes. Before we actually get into the lore video, there is one thing that I am to do that was pointed out to me by one of you guys. So I want to go ahead and take care of that really quick. Oh, there is still all bindings on Pantheons 4 and Pantheons 5 that we need to do as well. But that's going to be a very, very long-term goal. As you guys have seen through the Pantheons 1 and 3, that's going to take a lot of time. Holy shit, that's really loud. That's a lot louder. I'm using the different set of headphones than I do when I typically do my recordings. That's the B button. I've also still been playing Pokemon on my Switch, so my A's and B's are still confused. We're gonna go ahead and jump in really quick. I do have the Mossbag lore video pulled up on the computers and ready for viewings. That motherfucker is over an hour long. This initial reactions might be in parts because I don't want to upload like a fucking 3-hour long reactions and stuff. Hopefully you guys will bear with me in that regards. I was not anticipating it being that goddamn long, but it kind of makes sense. It kind of makes sense. You know what I mean? Was it down in this way? What? Oh, there it is. Why sound? What are you doing? Oh, Jesus Christ. I think it's because I have I have the browser, like the Mozilla Firefox and stuff like that. Hi there. Void given form. Throw? What? Hold on. Oh, I still have to do an episode where I'm going through all the entireties of the Hunter's Journal and reading them one by one and stuff like that. You can definitely expect that soon as well. Void Idol. Rare artifact from a time before Hallow Nest. Volatile liquid of the abyss writhes within. Inspired or mad, those ancient bugs, they devoted their worship to no lord, or power, or strength, but to the very darkness itself. Ooh, in the beginning, there was nothing. Mossbag's definitely going to touch up into that, right? Is this a fight? Void given form. It has a little thing on the bottom here, right? It has the Pure Vessel's horns. It has the Hollow Knight's horns. Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm excited to get into that fucking lore video now to figure out what that's going to be all about. And this is a secret hidden fight that's unlocked after doing all of the things on Radiance. Oh my God, that's gonna be. I'm gonna have to do the Radiant fights a lot sooner than I was anticipating, probably, if that's going to be the case. Oh, we can all look forward to that as well. But with that actually pointed out and me actually having a visual on that, I sure hope I can even do the streaming. I don't know if my PC and internet can handle the streaming. I'm gonna have to test that out a little bit. But in any case, with all that done, let us go ahead and swap to the Mossbag lore video. Whoa! I should also preface this that I have never made a React video a goddamn day in my life. I'm primarily 99.99% have just been doing the Let's Plays. I don't plan on doing React content on the regular, but this is kind of a special occasion, you know, and I feel like it'll be worth it. Let's get into it. Woo! Thank you, that was cute. Oh shit, hold on. Warning, this video contains a few spoilers for Hollow Knight. Please bear that in mind before embarking on this journey. Or don't. I really don't care. I am just text on a screen. True that. I appreciate that. That's cute.
If you were to ask me, what is your favorite video game ever made?
I'm going to turn that up.
I would have to say Cory in the House for the Nintendo DS.
Good taste.
But Hollow Knight would be a close second. Hollow Knight was released on February 24th, 2017 by Team Cherry, an
not actually that long
studio
ago,
based in the mythical land of Adelaide, South Australia. Over the past 3 years, Hollow Knight has become an indie darling. The game has sold over 3.5 million copies. It was the opening game at ADGQ 2019.
I don't think calling Hollow Knight an indie game really does it justice at this point. It's more popular than a lot of AAA titles, especially in recent years have been. Team Cherry really hit it out of the fucking park with it.
There's a Hollow Knight book, a line of plushies, t-shirts,
I should get that. I should get that too.
Warheads,
I should get that too.
Vinyl records for all you goddamn hipsters.
I don't really care about vinyl records though.
Team Cherry had one goal when making Hollow Knight. They wanted to create a world that allowed players to get completely lost in exploration. We can see this desire in Hollow Knight's design. The levels in Hollow Knight are massive, with secrets and rewards hidden in every nook and cranny.
That's why I slept every wall.
Charms, special abilities, or the game's navigation system requires the player to work for their map, forcing them to make a stronger mental image of the world in their head.
I'm very bad at that, by the way.
Score and Ari Gibson's artwork lend to this as well, creating an atmosphere that the player won't want to leave. But there's one aspect of Hollow Knight that keeps people like me coming back: the world building.
The lore, yeah.
When Super Metroid launched in 1994,
one of my favorite games of all time too, by the way.
It stood out for its amazing
I'm definitely going to be
sense
playing
of
through some
immersion.
Metroid at some point in the future.
Now in 1994, I was busy not being alive, but I've watched enough YouTube video essays to know that this game was a big deal. In case you didn't know,
I reset it to
Super
the
Metroid
window.
is basically the granddaddy of all Metroidvanias. That's why they're called Metroidvanias. Now in Super Metroid, there are moments that give the player a sense of depth. Basically the feeling that this world exists outside of Samus's interactions with it. In the room right before that
it's very
diabetic
isolating too.
crocodile
That's
thing,
another thing about Metroid.
Samus can find the corpse of a random soldier. His inclusion here doesn't change the gameplay at all, but instead gives the player a sense of wonder about the world they are exploring.
Environmental storytelling.
Who was this guy? Why was he here in the first place?
It's something Hollow Knight
jazz?
did very, very well.
Now, finding dead bodies and other random garbage is pretty cool, right? Well, Hollow Knight basically does the same thing. About a dozen times.
Why did that have to be the scene why did that have to be the body that you showed? There's so many corpses in the game. You had to show, it's fine. I made the decision. It's my mistake. I have to live with it.
Hollow Knight turns Hallownest into a living kingdom. You can sense the ancient history of the land when you look at dilapidated structures or giant barred doors. Nothing feels like it was put into the game randomly. There's a reason for it all.
Well, that reminds me of the big metal
those reasons
thing.
aren't the easiest to uncover. Hollow Knight's narrative is buried under layers of NPC dialogue, item descriptions, lore tablets, and even additional content like the Quirrell comic and fan gamers.
There's a Crow comic. There's a Crow. I'm going to do an episode while I'm reading the Crow comic. 100%.
These past 3 years have seen an insane amount of research by the Hollow Knight community to make sense of Team Cherry's sprawling world. We've even made it to the point where people are looking at the in-game signs to try and decipher Hallownest's logographic language. In this video, I hope to give you
hold on. Yeah, I'm definitely going to have to do this in parts because I'm pausing so frequently. Hopefully you guys are okay with that. If you would like a ride, it's actually the full fucking, if you would like a ride to a place that you recall, deposit Geo into the money box, select from options, and you will be transported on a rail network to the place on the map. It says all that. That's crazy. This puppet, this vessel is stabbed by an actual nail like ours. It's not like Hornet slated or anything. I guess every single enemy in the game uses a nail in some regards, huh? I need to fucking accept that fact. We are not the only ones with the nails.
Hallownest's history and uncertain future. When I'm not busy making surprisingly accurate Super Smash Bros. Roster speculation videos or insightful podcasts,
I should do some Smash 2 at some point. That'll be fun.
Donkey Kong Country television series.
I love that television series, by the way,
I'm usually making videos about Hollow Knight. And while I am a seasoned Hollow Knight lore expert, I cannot confirm that every musing or theory presented in this video is completely correct. I highly recommend checking out the lore section of the Hollow Knight wiki if you want a more neutral explanation of Hollow Knight's
I've avoided that like the plague to avoid spoilers.
But if you're too lazy to read, then I suggest you sit back, order some Domino's pizza, or just grab a block of cheese from the fridge.
I don't really like Domino's anymore.
Mostly complete lore of Hollow Knight.
Their ingredients got kind of cheap tastings.
It's a simple fact of life that every human worships a god, be that technology, ideologies, or in rare cases, God. As it turns out, the bugs in Hallownest pretty much operate in the same way. From the Mosskin born from the dream of a giant slug, to the emo kids of the ancient civilization who literally worship the darkness.
Oh, that's what that came from.
There's no shortage of things to worship in the world of Hollow Knight.
That makes sense.
Our story begins with a creature very much worthy of worship. A creature born from the carcass of a worm. The carcass can still be found in the Kingdom's Edge, and it's our only good look at what worms actually look like.
I was so stupid, I did not realize I was walking right into that mouth, by the way.
It is suggested there are no worms left in the world. They were incredibly long creatures that featured little to no limbs. Another more mysterious property of worms was that they had some kind of prescience or foresight. Basically, they could see the future to some capacity. It isn't clear how effective this ability was. Considering how the entire race went extinct, this foresight ability must have been pretty shit.
We know that via the dream dialogue from I believe it was the fungal core. I believe the dialogue was, I'm paraphrasing, like silly worm, what use is there in foreseeing a future that is inevitable and that you cannot prevent?
Getting back to this particular
Something
worm
along
carcass,
those lines.
it is explained that this worm traveled across the distant mountains and wastelands beyond Hallownest. Once it arrived in Hallownest, the worm died. Except not really. Inside the maw of the carcass sits a pale broken egg, out of which hatched a new form of worm, a being of meager shell. This form of the worm is usually referred to as the Pale King, and he's the character basically responsible for everything that happens in Hollow Knight. The Pale King is a higher being, a type of creature that exists above all others. His body was said to shine with a radiant visage that harmed those who looked upon him. The ultimate goal of the Pale King seemed to be in line with that of other worms. A line from the cryptic Mr. Mushroom reads, "Worms pull bugs into their thrall, till ages pass and kingdoms fall." In other words, it's just in their nature. Dogs wag their tails, cats bury their shit, and worms bring massive amounts of bugs into their service in order to form long-standing kingdoms and civilizations.
I love that concept so fucking much.
The Pale King emerged from the corpse of his former self and began to build his eternal kingdom, Hallownest.
So it isn't. So
There's
it was
just
implied.
one slight problem.
It was implied that the worm chose to become a bug for Hallownest. If I'm not mistaken, that does kind of verify
already
that.
living there. The area that would eventually become Hallownest was.
Whoa! I love that artistic drawing of it. Whoa, that is fucking cool. Oh my god! Seeing this kind of artistic version of the map, that is fucking beautiful. Look how fucking deep and complex it is too. Oh my, I love that.
With mantises, bees, moths, spiders, mushrooms, and bush cosplayers.
I like the Spidey Man down there. That's cute.
Each of these groups were already operating
I like
with
his sense
their
of
own
humor. He's
cultures
funny.
and societies, and each group had a different interaction with the Pale King. One of the more receptive groups to the arrival of the Pale King were the mushrooms of the fungal wastes. These creatures were able to communicate with one another through one shared mind. The mushrooms viewed this shared mind as a strength, and they were kind of smug dickheads about it. Ultimately, the mushrooms wearily accepted the Pale King's rule, viewing his foresight as a shield to the dangers of the future. Another group living in the fungal wastes is the Mantis tribe. The Mantises have a rich cultural history reaching back to long before the birth of Hallownest. The Mantises are a proud tribe, believing in the importance of proving one's physical strength. The Mantises are fiercely territorial, but will show respect to those who display great power. These Fight Club enthusiasts were led by 4 powerful Mantis Lords, who I guess just kind of sat around waiting for outsiders to challenge them.
4? Was there a broken... Is that... I don't...
The Mantis tribe had
I don't know if that's...
the Pale King's kingdom.
Okay, I'll pretend that's a 4th seat for you.
Come to a truce.
Yeah, so nicely.
For their independence from Hallownest, the Mantis tribe kept the beasts of Deepnest from invading Hallownest. Not sure why they didn't just go out the other exits from Deepnest, but whatever.
They can only jump so high.
Border Patrol. I don't work at ICE anymore. Let's move on to Deepnest. Now, many of the different tribes of Hallownest were kind enough to leave lore tablets behind, detailing pretty much everything we need to know about them. Unfortunately, the bugs of Deepnest didn't do that. We know that the spiders of Deepnest had a monarchy because why not? Those are always good, right? Also, within Deepnest are a separate group of spiders that immigrated to Deepnest.
Was it a monarchy? Because they talk about Queen Hera, Queen Hera the Beast.
At some point in the past, this group was known as the Weavers, and they established their own culture and history within Deepnest.
They're a part of Deepnest. I see.
Stories, spells, and shields. One thing we know for sure about Deepnest is that they really didn't want anything to do with Hallownest. The struggles of Deepnest-Hallownest relations would become painfully clear as time goes on, but for right now, it seems like the two remain fairly isolated from one another. Another section of pre-Hallownest
the Mantises having to fend them off, yeah.
Now, as far as we can tell, the mushrooms, mantises, and spiders of Deepnest didn't worship any higher beings. There is this giant mushroom corpse in the fungal core, but I don't think this is a higher being. I mean, who the hell would want to worship a fat-ass mushroom? Fat-ass slugs? Now that's dope. The land we know as Green Path was created by the higher being known as Un. Un used her great mind to dream the vegetation of Greenpath into the once barren caverns. Un's followers, the Mosskin, were also born out of Un's dream, making her their creator. Greenpath at its height was actually much larger than we see in-game. At one point, Greenpath stretched into both modern-day Queen's Garden and possibly Fog Canyon. Greenpath citizens showed themselves
because we see those elements of
society.
Greenpath within those environments.
They built a temple at the Lake of Un in order to worship her, and they even had their own line of defense, with Moss Knights showing proficiency in combat, using nails and shells as weapons. The Law of Un continued to remain in effect even after the Pale King arrived, but it seems like they allowed the king to establish a road through their lands, leading travelers to the heart of Hallownest. Hence the name Greenpath. Yeah.
And the sign that did specifically state that those who wandered beyond that border of Hallownest fell under the dominion, the mind of the Un. So that makes sense,
I'm sure they really racked their brains when naming this area, didn't they? Next, we have the bees. And while there is no lore on how these bees can turn into fucking drills, or how they can ignore all known laws of aviation, we do know how they reacted to the Pale King. These bugs decided to seal their hive off from the rest of the world, with only patrol bees being able to enter and exit the hive.
Yeah, they didn't want anything to do with
pretty much pointless in this story.
Hallownest.
And finally, we have the moth tribe.
I wouldn't necessarily call them pointless. I think I would disagree with that. They didn't fulfill like a significant role in Hallownest's path, but I do think it was important for the world building to establish that there were denizens within the Hallownest other than those like within Greenpath and stuff. Like the hive itself is still an ongoing and functioning society, and it seems completely unaffected by the Radiance's venom and what's going on around it. And I kind of appreciate that from a world building perspective. I don't know, it just goes that much further in making the world feel more believable and more grounded, because sure, you're going to have like this huge community, this huge society, this huge culture, but if you look at even our own cultures, there's so many subsects within those cultures that disagree with one another, and often at times have nothing, oftentimes want nothing to do with one another is the sentence that I'm trying to get out of my mouth. I personally think that while the hive didn't provide like a tangible or direct purpose, I still think I appreciated them, and they fulfilled a role within helping the world feel more breathed in, more believable, and more grounded.
In game, the only moth settlement is in the resting grounds, but the tribe might have also inhabited the Crystal Peak at one point. Now, as we all know, moths in real life are just complete assholes. As for the moths in Hollow Knight,
they leak dust everywhere.
Well, it's a bit complicated. The moth race is described as being a rather pacifist group, with few ever choosing to take up a weapon. During the Pale King's reign, the moth race delved amongst dreams and the dead, displaying the importance of remembering those who have passed, as well as learning how to shape dreams themselves. Similar to the Mosskin, the moth tribe was born from a higher being known as the Radiance. The Radiance is described as being a light in which the moth tribe basked. So she was basically a giant lamp to them.
To that point, I'm glad that he drew that analogy, because I have found it really fascinating how Team Cherry incorporated that natural behavior of bugs to be attracted to light within like Hollow Knight in its world and its concept of gods. And I think that's a very brilliant touch.
An important aspect about the Radiance is her ties to dreams and a substance known as essence. Essence are the remains of wishes and dreams, and are represented in-game by these dreamcatcher particle effects.
I think this is probably one of the most fascinating concepts within Hollow Knight to me.
As well as dream ghosts.
The idea of dreams.
Both of which are memories taking root in the world. The
each light can have its own set of dreams.
Essence, but she isn't the only higher being to give off essence.
Exactly.
Un has green particles, the Pale King has gray particles, and this sexy character named Grim gives off fiery red particles.
Terrible spouse and father,
the Radiance
though.
appears to be the main god.
He didn't mention Joni's light either. Joni emits the blue light. I still think that Joni herself, or whatever the fucking gigantic blinking bug in the background, was also its own kind of god.
We just know the
least about that, right?
In the dream realm. Getting back to the Moth tribe, it is their interaction with the Pale King that we need to discuss. Basically, the moths turned their backs on the Radiance completely, in order to worship the new light that had appeared, the Pale King's light. So yeah, moths are assholes in this game too. With her tribe forsaking her, the Radiance became a forgotten memory, a remnant of the past.
I don't know if I would say that.
Definitely not going to come up again later.
I don't know if they did it intentionally.
And so the Pale King's new kingdom was established, Hallownest. But there is one aspect of Hallownest that we need to discuss. Unfortunately, to better understand this, we're going to have to read some poetry. In wilds beyond they speak your name with reverence and regret. For none could tame our savage souls, yet you the challenge met. Under palest watch you taught, we changed. Base instincts were redeemed. A world you gave to bug and beast as they had never dreamed. This is from a poem titled Elegy for Hallownest, written by Modemon the Teacher. The poem appears at the beginning of every playthrough, and hints at what the Pale King and his kingdom offered. Much of the land outside of Hallownest appears to be a wasteland, where bugs survive off of instinct, without the burden of mind. Hallownest somehow taught these bugs and tamed their savagery. Basically, the Pale King changed the instincts of his subjects, and
Just
granted
that concept
them higher
is so
thought.
fascinating to me.
To get a better picture of this, let's look at two different characters, Boone and Tuck. These adorable panda bug things give us a clear display of Hallownest's effect. While both appear to be the same species of bug, Boone is dumb as a sack of rocks, struggling to string together words, while Tuck speaks fairly clearly. The main difference between these two characters is that while Boone lives outside of Hallownest, Tuck lives beneath the city's capital. Basically, it appears as though Hallownest is a literal holy ground that raises the intelligence of those who dwell within. The Pale King established a path, starting from the kingdom's entrance in King's Pass, winding through Greenpath and the fungal wastes, and finally ending at the massive capital at Hallownest's heart. We now know the capital city as the City of Tears, but that was likely not its original name. The rain that falls down onto the city from the blue lake above didn't begin until after the kingdom collapsed. So unless the capital was originally named by some edgy literature student, the name City of Tears wouldn't have made much sense.
So that's just the modern
king's motivation
name
for all
it,
this
yeah.
appears to have been his desire to be worshipped.
I appreciate that too, the terminology City of Tears, because it reflects a sadness and a sense of loss that those bugs whom now refer to that city as the City of Tears may feel.
Citizens of Hallownest believe that the Pale King created the world and everything in it. Shrines to the king can be found scattered throughout the kingdom, and king's idols were created and distributed to followers of the king. Despite the worship, the Pale King often kept himself hidden from his subjects, possibly to hide his blemishes. I mean, if you look at the size of the real Pale King to his statue in the ancient basin, the man is clearly overcompensating. The Pale King's White Palace was also built underneath the city, separating him from his subjects even more so. At the same time, certain powers became shunned in Hallownest, though we don't know for sure if the Pale King had anything to do with this. Lifeblood is a blue liquidy substance that leaves those who drink it feeling refreshed. However, the use of lifeblood was seen as a taboo, and those who used it were demonized as heretics.
Because it's a different
life.
life.
The use of soul
that makes
for
sense,
combat was also shunned. Soul is a sort of life force in Hollow Knight that animates the bodies of living creatures. But some characters are able to control the soul of others to conjure powerful spirits.
I think it's important to note that the light from soul is also
no
pale.
citizens of Hallownest ever use this power. However, the Pale King didn't rule alone. There was another higher being in the mix, a being known as the White Lady. The White Lady is a weird brute-like being that can be found in the modern-day Queen's Gardens. She is encased in a strange cocoon, and we know very little about her. With as much exposition we get for the Pale King, there is next to nothing on the White Lady. But one thing we do know is that she likes to breed. Like, a lot. The White Lady would often retreat to the Queen's Gardens.
That's the nature of like a tree, right?
Once controlled by the Mosskin.
To spread,
How
to
exactly
propagate.
she walked around and actually went places is a lore question too deep for even my expertise. The White Lady is also known as a pale being, along with the Pale King. What exactly are pale beings? Well, we don't know for sure.
It is stated from the White Lady that, well, I think she implies that her soul and the worm's soul were once one. If we're looking at the White Lady as like a tree, obviously, I think it would stand within reason that perhaps the worm had lived within one of her roots elsewhere or something like that.
But they seem to stand out even amongst higher beings as being even more powerful. I know that's a little confusing, so let's try using an example. I'd say that regular higher beings are like a TP-Link Archer C7 AC1750 wireless dual-band gigabit router, while pale beings are like the Asus RT-AX88U AX6000 dual-band 8X gigabit Wi-Fi router. Under the Pale King, Hallownest underwent a bit of an industrial revolution. He ordered the construction of the stagways, which were used to transport passengers and goods. The Forgotten Crossroads and the storerooms above the City of Tears were used to store goods that traveled along these stagways. The king also ordered the construction of the tramways, because literally no one is safe from the threat of automation. A tram was built between the Forgotten Crossroads and the resting grounds. A second tram was built from the kingdom's edge across the ancient basin over to Deep Nest. And then a third tram was started in Deep Nest and attempted to go further into Deep Nest. Not sure how useful that would have been to the bugs of Hallownest, but whatever. The Pale King's a smart guy, I'm not gonna question him. But anyway, the Pale King's super smart plan to build a tram in Deep Nest ended up getting a few of his tram workers killed. The bugs of Deep Nest rejected the Pale King's attempt to build a tram in their territory, further cementing the poor relations shared between the two groups. Aside from convenient fast travel, regular pathways were also used to cart goods around the kingdom.
Menderbug's favorite sign.
Probably one of the most important groups in Hallownest.
We won't talk about the
and
Menderbug.
Perhaps even all of fiction. An elusive guild of
No!
bugs, simply known as the
No,
Menderbugs,
don't talk about the
took to maintaining
Menderbug!
various signs scattered throughout Hallownest.
Oh man, alright,
From the journal entry
Mossbag.
of one Menderbug,
Your call, bro.
we can catch a glimpse into their ancient and unknowable minds.
Dear, dear diary, isn't life just the most beautiful thing? Fixing signs, mending posts, let them break, I say. I'm a better mender for all that repairing. I sometimes doubt there's a single bug in all of Hallownest happier than me.
Another example of the Pale King's expanding infrastructure
It's not really
is the
feeling
Crystal
anything
Peak.
now.
This area is filled with crystals that grow rapidly along walls, ceilings, and even the shells of certain bugs. These crystals were considered valuable to the bugs of Hallownest, resulting in large-scale mining efforts. We don't actually see the crystals used anywhere else in Hallownest.
Yeah, we don't. We didn't really get a lot of information on them itself.
Energy. The crystals are also said to sing, if you listen very carefully.
Are you gonna jump scare me? Okay, a Rickroll's basically the same thing.
In terms of military, Hallownest's first
Oh,
line of
and to the crystals, before we move on, to the crystals, I do want to point out that if we're following the conventions and what light means within the world of Hollow Knight, that pink light itself could also belong to a god, either at one point in time or currently. That would be my favorite light, absolutely.
Simply known as the Five Great Knights. The members of this esteemed coalition were Ogrim, Hagamol, Zamir, Drya, and Isma.
Zamir
For
and
being so
Drya.
important,
Okay.
most of the information about these knights has been lost to time. Ogrim is the knight we know the most about, since he is one of the few knights still alive during the
So
events of
jovial.
the game.
I love Ogrim so much.
Ogrim expressed a great amount of loyalty towards
He
the
built a
king,
poopy statue
and he
for
maybe
us.
had something going on with Isma, but we really don't know. Hagamol was known for his sense of humor, and
That would make sense, by the way, if Ogrim had something going on with Isma because of the poopies and the manure and the fertilizations of the growths and the greens and the florals. Like, hey, that would make a lot of sense to me.
his soft-spoken voice. But at the same time, he was also dummy thick. Mysterious Samir arrived in Hallownest from a serene land.
Look forward to Pale Court,
bringing
by the
with
way. We
her
will
a
be playing that
collection
very,
of
very,
delicate
very soon.
flowers. At some point, she also got into a relationship with a mantis. But not just any mantis. A daughter of one of the mantis lords. So yeah, it seems like these great knights were slaying in more ways than one. All we really know about Drya is that she was fierce, caring,
Ogrim
and
got that
wise.
Riz, that poopy Riz.
As for Isma, she was described as being kind. She also appears to be some sort of weird plant life form, but there's no information on where she's from or what her powers were. The Five Great Knights play an important role in the Champion's Call, the Knotted Grove, and the Battle of the Blackworm. We have no idea what these events were or how they affected Hallownest, but they sound cool nonetheless.
That does sound cool.
During
Battle of the
Hallownest's reign,
Blackworm.
there was another strange area that seemed to exist separate from the Pale King's rule. Carved
The
out of
Colosseum of
cliffs an
Fools!
ancient bug, an area called the Colosseum of Fools was constructed, and it was a destination for warriors from outside Hallownest.
I do want to also draw the parallel in comparison to the way that the that the fools within the Colosseum of Fools are kind of tossed off the cliff and plummet to their deaths. I mentioned it as we were going throughout the segment, but during the flashback when we finally get down into the secret in the abyss and we're climbing up, we see our fellow vessels falling in this very much the same way. So I kind of like to draw that comparison in such a way that after the pure vessel arose, as it were, the Pale King kind of viewed these lesser vessels as fools for trying to even arise to the level that the pure vessel and Pale King itself were on.
The sole purpose for fighting in the Colosseum appeared to be simply for glory, with a mysterious figure known as the Lord Fool overseeing the combat. We don't know when the Colosseum was constructed or
Still
if the
Dutch,
Pale
by the
King
way.
was involved, but one of his servants, the Pale Lurker,
Yeah.
became a champion in the Colosseum, perhaps indicating the Pale King's approval. And finally, there was the Royal Waterways, where the fecal excrement
There's so
of the
many
kingdom
aspects that we
was
still know
washed
so
out
little
into the fungal
about like
wastes.
that.
This area saw the rise of a species of parasite-like creatures called the flukes. The flukes spawned from the fluke marm, a giant monster with cavities in which tinier flukes live.
They're little
There really
lips.
isn't too
Little
much more involved
my
with the
lips.
flukes, but I do need to point out that the fluke marm is canonically a MILF.
Alluring god
that's
of
not
motherhood.
even debatable. The sky is blue, 2 + 2 = 4, and we all want to fuck this thing. And so this was the kingdom of Hallownest.
I don't know
at
if that
its
was a
height.
thought in my head, but now
Hallownest
it is
was
a thought in my head,
vast kingdom
admittedly.
connected by a network
I
of
appreciate
stagways
that.
and tram stations. The bugs of Hallownest mourned their dead on the resting grounds, engaged in commerce using Geo, the de facto currency of the region, and a thriving capital located in the middle of the kingdom. The Pale King had succeeded in crafting a full-blown society, but we all know there are pitfalls to living in a society. As the suspiciously knowledgeable Hunter points out in his journal, the Pale King had created a population of weak and pathetic creatures. The bugs of Hallownest did not hunt for their own food and had become complacent with their comfort. This is even more obvious with the east wing of the capital. These greedy members of Hallownest's high society became complete cowards, obsessed with riches and plum from
There is
excess
truth to that,
wealth.
yeah.
The bugs living in Hallownest
They
Prime
use that
looked
kind of
quite
burgundy
different than
color,
the
I
instinctive
think, to
simpletons
symbolize
they once
that.
were. Their savagery had been replaced with intelligence, and through that intellect, they gave the Pale King the devotion and service he desired. And while there
And I
were a
think
few
the more they
snags along
worshipped the
way,
Pale King, the stronger
they
he
were
got, by
shining
the way.
times
So
for the
that's,
king
I think
and
the
his
light
subjects.
eventually overtook the
Resting
radiant
at the
light.
threshold of Hallownest is a strange lore tablet, proclaiming Hallownest to be the last and only civilization. It calls Hallownest an eternal kingdom. This appears to have been the Pale King's goal, for Hallownest to stand against a wasted world as a final beacon for civilization. And that was the Pale King's ultimate folly, to think that he could succeed where so many others had failed before.
To push
Long
back against
before
the
Pale
natural cycle,
Kings
yeah.
or the Barry Bensons of the world, the land of Hallownest was controlled by an ancient caste. Hints of Hallownest history are littered throughout the land, with the most notable examples being the soul totems
The
and
Hallownest
arcane
bugs,
eggs.
if I'm recalling correctly,
One sect of these
reshaped
ancient
those
bugs
into the
didn't
pure
worship a god like the Pale King
King's
or
shape.
any lord, but instead a dark and mysterious substance known as the Void. This ancient caste once also tried to lay claim to the entire land of Hallownest, but they too failed. In his quest to conquer all of Hallownest, the Pale King had made an enemy long forgotten, an enemy that was about to be remembered. I mentioned earlier that the Moth tribe entirely forgot about the Radiants
The
in order
music,
to
as soon as
worship
that
the Pale
piano
King,
kicked in.
but that isn't quite true. Memories of her
I
still
love that
lingered, and hushed
rendition of it,
whispers
though.
of faith kept the Radiants alive. At the summit of the Crystal Peak, a location known as Hallownest Crown, a strange collection of glyphs can be found. Joining these glyphs is a statue
can't
of the
read them either.
Radiants, presiding over the kingdom below. This old summit is the sole standing shrine left to the Radiants. This was built in order to keep the memory of the Radiants alive. The Radiants' light began to appear in the dreams of Hallownest citizens. This light manifested itself in an infection that ravaged through the kingdom's tunnels. Those infected would fall into a deep sleep and awaken with broken minds.
We saved Sly
Some
from that,
of the
yeah.
lesser bugs tried to resist the Radiance's light, which only resulted in them being consumed by it even more so. Many infected bugs lost their wills and began attacking bugs that weren't infected. The infection also twisted the bodies of its hosts, causing them to bloat and occasionally
that thing,
develop
yeah.
orange cysts on their bodies. For many victims, they were reverted back to their basic instincts, carrying out the duties they once fulfilled in life, but now as mindless slaves. Those caught up in the infection were linked into the Radiance's hive mind, allowing her to control their bodies if needed. As the infection spread across
All
Hallownest,
them Moss guys
many
got
groups
took over
looked
in
to
the
solutions
cathedral.
to fight off the Radiance's light. The gates to the City of Tears were closed in an attempt to keep the infection from reaching the city. The stagways were also shut down at some point, and many of the stags eventually died out. But some
Yeah.
took more proactive efforts against the infection. The scholars of the Soul Sanctum decided to harness the power of Soul in an attempt to fight the infection. This resulted in the deaths of hundreds of bugs, whose souls were sucked out and injected into the bodies of the scholars. Their goal was to achieve some kind of pure focus, which would somehow protect them from plagues of the mind. The scholars'
Pale
leader,
King
the
rejected
Soul
this.
Master, was driven mad by the sheer power of Soul, and his entire sect failed to avoid infection. But hey, at least they took as many innocent people down with them as they could. The Mantis tribe,
Gray
showing a
linings, as it
stronger
were,
will
right?
than the common bug, were able to stave off the infection. However, one of the 4 Mantis Lords turned against his sisters. He and his followers took in the infection willingly, as it gave them more strength and courage. At some point during all this, the Traitor Lord and his followers were exiled from the Mantis village, eventually taking up residence in the Queen's Gardens. The Traitor Lord's daughter ended up dying at some point. This is the same Mantis that was in a relationship
We can see
with
her
Zamir,
spirit?
one of the 5 Great Knights. But the Mantises
Oh, when we
rejected
gave it-
their
yeah.
union because of Zamir's outsideness. As a gamer, this type of prejudice is all too familiar, and honestly, it makes me sick. With the 5 Great Knights completely useless to fight against the infection, the Pale King devised his own scheme. A scheme involving a strange substance known as Void. As I mentioned earlier,
The
Pale
Abyss
King's
sound
White
kicking
Palace
in.
was built in an area called the Ancient Basin. But his
One of my
castle
favorite
wasn't
battle
the
themes
only
as well, by the
noteworthy
way.
thing down there. At the bottom of the Ancient Basin was the entrance to a pit known as the Abyss. Within the Abyss was a lake composed of void. The Pale King realized that this void could be given form, as evidenced by an imprint of such deep within the Abyss, possibly left there by the ancient civilization that predated Hallownest. The Pale King devised a workshop in his palace, where he placed void in armor shells imbued with soul, creating servants
Where we
known
get,
as
like, the
King's
Collector.
molds and wing molds. These void creatures were somehow imprinted with the desire of the Pale King, so that they would serve him. It isn't clear when the Pale King started making these creatures. There is evidence to imply that even common bugs were aware of King's molds, but the point is, the Pale King turned to the void in order to create another creature, one that he believed could contain the Radiance and her infection. He tried to create a pure vessel. The Radiance's infection needs its host to have a will and a mind in order to enslave it. A pure vessel would be a creature made of void designed to lack those features. The Pale King believed that by harnessing the void inside a pure vessel, he would be able to stop the infection and keep Hallownest lasting eternal. But his method for creating this so-called pure vessel was incredibly cruel. This is where the White Lady and her King Kong-sized libido come into play. These 2 higher beings engaged in a union of some kind, resulting in the creation of several eggs that were dropped down into the abyss. There, the void seeped into these eggs.
That explains why the White Lady's cocoon resembles all the kinds of eggs that we see ourselves hatching from, including the one that was within the worm's body itself.
Corrupting the
That makes a lot of
offspring
sense.
the Pale King and the White Lady. This act resulted in the creation of the vessels. The vessels are not technically considered to be alive. They are shells created from the Pale King and White Lady that have been filled with a void. Within each vessel is a shade, a completely void being hidden behind the face of the vessel. Vessels are also non-gendered, I guess because they're dead or something. I'm not sure if that's
They're just
how
shade.
that
They're
works,
just shady
but
liquid goop.
whatever.
They're gender
I'm not
fluid.
an expert
That's how
on
I
these
would
kinds
They're
of
probably
things.
gender fluid.
I
Yeah.
don't work at ICE anymore. Thousands of vessels were created during this process, but only one was chosen as the pure vessel. This particular vessel, chosen by the Pale King, was deemed the Hollow Knight, and was taken away to the White Palace. But I want to take a bit of a closer look at this part of the story. There are a number of questions and theories surrounding this moment that I really want to dig into. The big question
Okay, please do,
surrounding this
yeah.
moment is, why was the Hollow Knight chosen over any other vessel? One common theory is that the Pale King took these vessels back to the White Palace and evaluated them using his giant collection of buzzsaws.
That was kind of my initial interpretation of the Path of Pain. When we see when we get to the end of Path of Pain and we see Pure Vessel with Pale King rather, it was my feeling that perhaps he had Pure Vessel put through this obstacle course, and that's what kind of proved itself to the Pale King.
This theory is probably the least likely explanation. It kinda exists just to explain the buzzsaws, which is quite the mystery, I'll admit, but doesn't really mesh with the vessels very well.
I like the theory that the reason the bug saws existed within the White Palace as we visit it is because it's the Pale King's attempt at perhaps preserving or blocking off this memory of the
Just
pure
being good
vessel.
at Super Meat Boy proved that you are a worthy vessel. And while thinking about logistics in a game about magic bugs is never a good idea,
That's
how
funny.
exactly did
I like
the
that
Pale
meme.
King transfer these thousands of vessels to his palace
That's how it felt.
without characters like the Dung Defender finding out? So this means that the Pale King probably made his decision without taking any of the vessels out of the Abyss. So how did the Pale King make his evaluation? I think the best explanation comes from a theory I originally heard from a user named Golden Flower Fan. Basically, the vessels were hatched down at the bottom of the Abyss, and the first one to make it to the top was chosen by the Pale King. In a memory of this event, we see vessels falling from above back down into the pit of the Abyss.
He would view them as fools.
Perhaps these vessels weren't being cast down into the Abyss, but fell while trying to escape out of it. The lore tablet
The
outside
same way that
the
we
Abyss
did.
appears to support this theory.
And we almost made it, too.
Our pure vessel has ascended. Beyond lies only the refuse and regret of its creation. We shall enter that place no longer. This tablet was likely written right after the Hollow Knight was chosen, considering that is when the entrance to the Abyss was sealed off.
They sealed it off completely.
The tablet proclaims that the pure vessel has ascended, or in other words, climbed out of the Abyss. And while cut content should never be considered canon, I would just like to point out that an earlier version of this tablet, found in the game's code, was even more explicit about this. It read, "From below, our pure vessel has ascended." But how does making it to the top of the Abyss first prove that
That's
the
a
Hollow
different
Knight is
wording, but
somehow
same
a
point, I
perfectly
believe,
hollow vessel? Well, I think
do
this
appreciate
whole
the rewording
concept
of it.
might just be a misconception.
More
What
mysticism
if the Hollow Knight
revolved
wasn't
around it.
any different from the other vessels? All the vessels were made in the exact same way after all. The idea that the Hollow Knight was somehow more hollow than the other vessels comes from the fact that there were so many vessels created in the first place. If they only needed one, then why create so goddamn many? I mean, this is like Octomom on steroids. Well, these are bugs
I
we're
found
talking
Waldo. I
about,
saw Waldo
so
in there,
it
by
would
the
make
way.
sense that multiple offspring would come from one egg. And it might have been a precaution to produce multiple vessels in hopes that at least one would be able to successfully escape the Abyss.
I do think there's also some possibility that the kind of, well, you know, if the Pale King was so sure that pure vessel would be pure and able to contain it, but then realized that it couldn't. I don't know. I feel like there might be some kind of intention behind creating so many for the purpose of recycling from vessel to vessel to vessel to vessel, because that's what we see us doing in Ending 1, right? I have to question how much Pale King might have intended that to be the case. It would go along with him saying, you know, this is my eternal kingdom.
Now,
And it would
another
keep it
explanation
going in
could be that
perpetuity.
the Pale King just yeeted other vessels that made it to the top first, after determining that they weren't
I don't
hollow.
think I believe
which would
that.
better explain why so many were created.
No,
Ultimately,
I think it could be stated that there were so many created, at least the way that I'm interpreting it, that if this vessel failed, Hallownest would be destroyed. I'm not going to let that happen, so let me create this cycle. Similar to like how in Dark Souls 1, there has like the flames lit, and then it dies down, and then something else has to come by to relight that flame. That's kind of the vibe that I was getting from it. So that might be a reason that I might explain away why there's so many.
exact details aren't super important, but I do find it interesting how many different interpretations can be pulled from this part of the lore. After the Hollow Knight was chosen, the Pale King sealed the doorway to the Abyss, leaving the discarded vessels to rot away in darkness. These actions were not taken lightly by the Pale King or the White
Then there's the
Lady.
question of how we got
Both
through that seal, how we went from the
participants
abyss
expressed shame in what they
and
did,
ended up on the
but
surface
saw no other option to
through
save
King's
the kingdom.
Pass.
But the vessels weren't the only poor saps sealed away in the Abyss. There's also a lighthouse that was built on top of a naturally
That looks really
formed
fucking
spire.
cool, seeing it.
Its light shining
zoomed
down
out
on an ocean
outside
of
of the
abyss
game.
below. Inside was one of the Pale King's royal retainers, who was left in charge of keeping the lighthouse turned on. So this brave soul was willingly sealed in a dark and dangerous tomb for the rest of his life, just so he could not pull a lever. Well, at least he was living with purpose. With the Abyss sealed and the Hollow Knight chosen, the Pale King's plan was beginning to come together. The Hollow Knight was raised and trained to prime form, causing it to grow several times its original size. We don't know exactly why this happened, but I guess the Hollow Knight is just a grower and not a shower.
If we are looking at ourselves and our own player character, anytime we ascend, like when we're fighting the Radiants for the first time, for example, or especially for endings 4 and 5, like we get fucking gargantuan. I think it's just maybe perhaps within the nature of the void that as it grows stronger, it expands. Much
We
like
know that the Hollow
light
Knight
itself.
was trained to use a nail, but why was this even necessary? One possible explanation is that the Hollow Knight needed to protect itself in case an intruder tried to kill it. You know, like the player. Or perhaps this was important in the process of containing the Radiants.
I mean, if the Radiance was taking over bugs, and they would probably want to destroy the vessel that was meant to contain the Radiance and defeat it in its entirety, right? So I would assume that they trained the Hollow Knight to fight bugs that were taken over by the Radiance.
Unfortunately, the details of that are never fully explained.
True that,
the
true
Hollow
that.
Knight might have somehow focused the Radiance inside itself, but Team Cherry gives us no explanation of how that might have worked. But
That's
that
a possibility
still wasn't
too.
enough for the Pale King.
That the Hollow Knight was fighting
Additional
the Radiance
skills were needed
within
in order to
the
protect
Dream
the Hollow
Realm.
Knight's physical body, while the Radiance was trapped inside of it. To achieve this, the Pale King sought the help of 3 particular bugs, who would later be known as the Dreamers: Lurien the Watcher, Motomon the Teacher, and Hera the Beast. Lurien is definitely the most mysterious of the 3 Dreamers.
One we know least
He lived
about,
in the
yeah.
Watcher Spire in the City
I made that
of Tears.
observation.
From there, Lurien watched over the city with his telescope. Lurien was a pretty big fan of the king, so it probably took little convincing for him to lie down for him. Lurien might also be tied to another strange incident that occurred in the City of Tears. Hidden on some of Lurien's lore tablets are images of jars, the same jars that can be found stockpiled in the Tower of Love. This building sits on the outskirts of the city, and is the setting of one of the most bizarre bosses in the game, the Collector. The Collector is a void construct that appears to have been made from the same mold used to create the King's molds. But the Collector is unique because, well,
Good grief, he's naked!
The Collector stayed in the Tower of Love.
He has a
with
very
noble
naked
bug who
personality. I
likely
would say
owned
that's the most notable thing
establishment.
about him.
In the tower, a number of bugs can be found captured in jars, implying that these two were tasked with collecting these creatures. However, the Collector somehow became obsessed with grubs, creating a map to keep track of grubs it captured in jars.
I don't think it's so much that the Collector was designed to collect. I can't remember exactly where we got the dialogue from it for, but I'm pretty sure it's implied that the Collector's purpose was to protect, to preserve, much in the same way that the Pure Vessel and the Pure King's goal was to preserve the Hallownest. I think that's more
As well
the
as
purpose
keeping a
of,
strange
of the
shrine,
Collector.
displaying a grub in the style of the Vitruvian Man.
It did get really fascinated with grubs, though.
Eventually,
It's
the bugs
true,
staying
yeah.
with the Collector decided to lock it inside the Tower of Love, and fled to the Queen's Gardens, where it died, likely due to overexposure to the Void. Despite being
I see,
locked
okay.
up in the
That
tower,
explains the
Collector is
blood-
still
the
spotted
Void
by the
crying.
Hunter at some point, which either means this only happened recently, or the Hunter has been farting around in Hallownest for a long-ass time. We have no idea what these creatures were trying to do. It's implied that the Collector was trying to preserve the creatures of Hallownest, perhaps trying to protect them from the spread of the infection, but we don't know where the Collector's obsession with grubs originated. And while Lurien does seem connected to all of this, we don't know how involved he was with this operation, or what its end goal exactly was. Motomon the Teacher lived in the Teacher's Archives, a library built atop a lake of acid in the Fog Canyon.
Before we go on, could it be that the caterpillar, the grubs themselves, seem immune to like light and like outright, and maybe that's what maybe kind of drove the Collector to become obsessed with them, because everything else that was collected was susceptible to being taken over by the light, and we never see the grubs even so much as hint of being taken over by the infection or the venom, despite being literally like in the Forgotten Crossroads where the infection is fucking going rampant.
The lower half of her body consists of tentacles, making her a popular subject for the thriving Hollow Knight R34 community. The archives
I'm sure.
in the Fog Canyon as a whole are also filled with these strange Metroid knockoffs. These creatures are likely related to Monomon in some way.
They are kind of
They could be her
Metroid-like,
live
kind of.
offspring, her test tube babies, or possibly even her shit. Motomon uses futuristic cathoid ray tube things to store
I
information
love
about
the fucking
Hallownest.
archives.
Several terminals
It
in the
stood out
Teacher's
so
archive
brilliantly.
go into detail about the Pale King's plan to defeat the Radiants, indicating that Motomon had intimate knowledge of what she was taking part in. Finally, the Pale King sought the help of Hera the Beast, the Queen
Here's the
of
one that I
Deepness.
missed the lore out for.
Now, as I mentioned earlier,
We'll still be
relations between
experiencing that
Hellenus and
in our next
Deepness
play
were
runs, by the way.
kinda not great. Unlike the other two dreamers,
Could have been better.
Hera
Could have been
needed to
better.
be convinced
They'll talk
in
it
order
out.
to help the Pale King. Hera would eventually agree to become a dreamer in exchange for a child. The Pale King agreed, and the two engaged in a dalliance, which is a fancy way of saying they totally boned.
That is
The White
that
Lady
is what
was okay with this
midwife.
arrangement. In
kind of
fact,
hinted at
she might
for
have been
me.
watching from the closet. The motive
still wondering
behind
why,
Hera's
though.
request is never elaborated on, but it appears
Yeah.
as though the King of Deepnest was dead at this point. Hera was a common bug, so perhaps she desired the Pale King's pale seed so that her child could be of high birth. The bargain between Hera and the Pale King resulted in the birth of Hornet.
There she is.
She became known as the gendered child, because unlike the Pale King's other children, Hornet was not hollowed out by the Abyss. Hera
Okay,
and
see ya,
Hornet
Carl.
spent little time together, as Hera had to make good on her end of the bargain. And so the three dreamers were put to rest. Through their actions, a seal was placed over the black egg, prohibiting entrance into the chamber. These dreamers
I'm going to say that my strongest understanding for why Hera would want a daughter, despite being put into a dream state in which like she wouldn't really be able to raise that daughter and stuff, is perhaps to continue their line of the Weavers farther after Hera had become slept. Now, Hera's referred to as a queen within Deep Nest, so I am a little confused on why it stated that she was just kind of a regular bug. She's definitely referred to as the queen, unless I'm mistaken.
also had their own protection. At the base of Lurian's spire, the Watcher Knights guarded access to their master's body. Motomon's body was protected by a giant jellyfish named Umu. On top of this, Motomon entrusted her servant Quirrell with a mask
Best
that could
character
be
in the game.
required to break an additional seal she had placed over herself. So
Quirrell,
she
that is,
basically is
Quirrell.
double wrapping herself. As for Hera, we're not really sure what protected her, since it is never actually seen in-game.
That's the thing we forgot
We
to
don't know
revisit.
where
I
this
have no
creature is
idea what the
hiding,
fuck that
But
is.
whoever it is, they really suck at their job. Now there appears to be one more element to the Pale King's plan, involving the Weavers. Hidden away in the Weaver's den is an incomplete seal of binding, woven from silk. This design prominently features the Hollow Knight's head, and can be found in the White Palace, as well as blocking the exit during the Hollow Knight fight. Silk spools
right.
created by the Weavers can be found in the Stag Station in Deep Nest, as well as the Stag Station next to the White Palace. These spools can also be found in the Pale King's workshop. We know that the Weavers were closely tied to Hera and Hornet, so their actions might have been a part of the deal between the Pale King and Hera. Once the Hollow Knight was ready, the Radiance was somehow channeled into the vessel, which was then placed inside of a giant black egg located in the Forgotten Crossroads. This egg was built to sustain the Hollow Knight, and itself appears to be fashioned from void. The Hollow Knight was chained up, and the entrance to the black egg was locked behind
Just
a
hanging out,
powerful
big brother.
seal created by the three dreamers. Initially, this convoluted plan actually worked, and the infection was successfully contained. Memorials to the Hollow Knight and the Dreamers were erected in the City of Tears and the Resting Grounds. But this is the part of the story where things get a little bit hazy.
I do think that might be a part of the story where we could kind of take a break and call it a wrap for this initial part, but continue and look forward to the next. It absolutely will be coming tomorrow. Is really helping me to kind of understand a little more of what I experienced and kind of verifying a lot of those initial impressions and interpretations on the world of Hollownest and exactly what was going on between the beginnings and the ends. What I'm most curious to learn a little more about is the ancient abyss and the beings that came beforehand, because it is definitely stated and suggested through the environmental storytelling that the abyss has definitely existed before the Hollownest. If we are to assume that God's middle light, the void is the antithesis to said light, I would almost say that the void is probably the starting point for the universe or for life in general within the world of Hollow Knight. This initial like burstings of light, we'll say, with perhaps the radiance, as I think that's the oldest. I don't know if it's stated that if Un came before or after, or what kind of like where they fall into the timelines. But I'm kind of seeing it as like a big bang, as it were, where in the beginning you just had nothing, just void, just darkness, right? This primordial ooze, this primordial sea. That's kind of where I'm coming from that from that particular line of thought. Still, tons of many questions and stuff, and I'm very much looking forward to finally getting those answers. Thank you guys for joining me for this initial reaction. Again, I've never done a reaction before in my goddamn life. I don't know how many reactions I will be doing within my, YouTube career in the many, many, many years to come. But hopefully you guys enjoy it, and hopefully if I do more, I'll eventually get better at it. So look forward to the next ones tomorrow. I know I will be. And until then, goodbye.